So for the week 7 video assignment, I will be modeling critical thinking by using the Think Aloud strategy. The content area and grade level I will be focusing on is high school English, and for this exercise, I'm going to be targeting grade 10. The problem slash topic I am going to be exploring is for students to cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. So essentially teaching students reading comprehension skills, as well as how to close read and to critically talk about and analyze the author's claim that's being presented in the writing. So just a little extra step beyond reading comprehension. And again, the strategy I will be using is the Think Aloud strategy. There are a few assumptions that I do have going into this. So the first one being that the author's point of view will be present in their claim and in their points of reasoning. The second one being the strength, relevancy, and verifiability of the evidence used in the text will greatly influence the author's credibility. So this is the important part, or the most important part of the text for students to analyze. I do assume that an author's argument stands upon the evidence that is being presented. So if the evidence is unsound, then at that point it is assumed, or I assume, that the argument falls apart. So I do want students to learn how to effectively analyze the evidence that's being used and to ensure that the evidence that they're reading from the text is sound evidence. And then the last assumption I have, this is more in regards to my assumptions about the students. So my third assumption is that students may be focused on if they agree with the author rather than assessing the soundness of the author's argument. Assuming, in my case, students will hold this bias, it could prevent students from critically thinking about the author's argument. I have this assumption just from past experience working with students when they are writing argumentative essays. A lot of the times we'll have, just kind of like reflection questions on, we'll bring up a point in the text, maybe an opinion, and it asks the student, do you agree, yes or no? And from my experience teaching, students kind of have a hard time picking a yes or no, because to them it's very black and white, and they're really not sure which one to stand with. So a lot of the times they'll get answers where it's like yes and no, or it can be both, which I explain it's great to understand both perspectives. You will want to do that, but at times students kind of do have a little bit of a challenge sticking to a side and committing to that. So that's the last assumption I have for students as we interact with this content. So the 3 branching options in my thought process. So like I said before, the strategy I will use is the Think Aloud strategy. This is a strategy I actually use quite often teaching, especially teaching English. Learning how to write can be difficult to do on one's own without any guidance. So the Think Aloud strategy helps students understand the steps that they need to take in order to become an effective writer. So first step in my thought process is I will use a short example text or short example essay, article, whatever it may be. We will read the text aloud together, and then as I break down the text, I will organize the information by locating the author's main idea and supporting details. I will model how to make annotations to show students how they can find and make note of important details from a text. So I think modeling annotate how to make proper annotations would be a great benefit to students, so that way it allows them to quickly recognize and understand the main points of the text they're reading. Usually during the first read aloud, it can be a little difficult to absorb all the information at once. So we'll read together the first time, and then the point of annotations is to go back into the reading and go into that introduction, mark the claim or thesis that is present, and then as we're going through the rest of the text, I will go through each body paragraph and then underline, highlight, star, whatever annotation I decide to make, and annotate the major details along with minor supporting details, just purely for comprehension sake. Second, I will then identify the author's claim / perspective. So I will model to students how to do this by pointing out the claim or the thesis statement from the author. This can actually even be done in that very first step with our annotation, so it's probably already done anyways. This also includes identifying their points of reasoning or their points of support, and also identifying the language / tone that's being used throughout the text. Again, annotation is a very helpful tool to use when going in and identifying textual evidence and analyzing an author's argument. So for finding language and tone, I will show students that I can do this by circling, boxing, underline, whatever annotation they want to do, annotating certain word choices or phrases used in the text to show that these specific word choices or phrases that the author makes is typically on purpose. It's to show the emotions that the author may portray, any feelings they may hold towards the topic that they're communicating about through the text. So the first and second step that I talked about will demonstrate how to identify what the text says explicitly. So this is purely just how to understand the just kind of the basics of the text, just reading comprehension, basic understanding, so that way students know that they understand what the author is talking about. Then that's when we get to the third step, which requires a little bit more analysis and a little bit more critical thinking on the student's part. So third, after gathering all the information listed above for reading comprehension's sake, I will demonstrate how I can draw inferences from the text. So because inferences are implicit, I will show students how textual evidence can lead me to making conclusions about the topic itself, the author's message, or the author's assumption. So if an author seems like they are on the pro side of an argument, I can use certain word choices, word phrases that are explicitly said in the text, and then my knowledge about the topic that they are addressing, along with what is said in the text, can lead me to an inference on what I can infer about the author's assumption about the topic. We will want to pay attention to the author's assumption so we can analyze if the author is coming from a place of analysis or maybe from a place of bias. And the inferences we make become our own analysis of the text, and we can now further dissect the author's argument, which will eventually lead us to making our own argument. So, like I said, using the think aloud strategy, I'm displaying to students my thought process, the questions I should be asking when I'm looking at how to, one, understand what the author is trying to communicate in a text, and how to make inferences from what the author is saying. We gather basic information, just the author's main idea, claim, thesis, so many phrases for that, and their points of reasoning. And then once we have that understanding of it, we can dig a little bit deeper, look at the author's tone, their language, and then that can lead us to making inferences about, like I said before, the topic, the message, or even the author's assumptions. So students seeing me work through that thought process and verbally explaining it to them will give them a guide of how they can do that when they begin to work independently on analyzing text by themselves.